home with East County Television. ECTV, Channel 25.
Welcome to East County Pathways. Today we have as guest Charles Hosford from Charles Hosford & Associates. I call him Hoss, and I'll probably call him that during the program. He and I have been friends for many, many years, and we've shared a number of things together. And first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about your own personal pilgrimage. You began as an educator and up as a high school principal, and then you moved into as a management consultant field. Tell me a little bit about your pilgrimage.
Well, thank you, Arthur. First of all, I'm surprised you invited me here because I've always enjoyed your programs very much. I started out in education, as you know, and then when I became principal of a high school, I determined that was a management position rather than an education position, so I started to get management training and found out that to be very exciting and got an opportunity to take an internship in the behavioral sciences. And so I changed careers at 40 and been on my own now for about 15 years as a management consultant to a variety of organizations. So it's been kind of evolution of interests.
Are there many people who change careers, especially going to management and so forth? Is that something?
Well, I'm seeing more and more of that now. Yeah, people, when you get 40, I think you have a couple choices. They tell us you can either change careers or change spouses. And I think it's much more desirable to change careers. And I found it very exciting. And I wouldn't mind changing careers again if I didn't enjoy my work so much now. I think it's very energizing, exciting. You learn things. I'm in favor of changing careers often.
Now, I won't ask how long you've been in as a management consultant, because then we'd be giving your age away here.
It's been a long time.
In the years that you've been a management consultant, what are some of the changes you've seen on the management scene? Has there been any changes at all?
Oh, it's been tremendous change, and I think that's what makes it so exciting now, is that what's happening in organizations, what's happening to people in organizations, what's happening to managers in organizations is very dynamic, and it's changes kind of the way of life. One of my clients, an electronics firm, has to redo their 5-year plan every 90 days. We must look at our budget again because orders change, the cost of building products change so fast that we just can't sit back and think long range anymore. It's almost immediately step-by-step approach to things.
Now, what are some of the reasons for these changes?
Well, we're really in going through our second industrial revolution. You notice we've more or less moving away from the production, smokestack, assembly line types of working environments, and now we're more in service, information type of activities. You know, the latest books, Megatrends, Search of Excellence, bring this out very clearly, that we are in a whole new area. And that brings about a very important dynamic that we hadn't considered before. Remember, in the first industrial revolution, the greatest invention was the assembly line. That increased productivity in the United States unbelievably. But what did it do to the workers? It took away all their discretionary time. All their work was automatic. They just step by step did the same thing, and they had no control over their efforts because the assembly line controlled it. Nowadays, that's gone, and everything is more or less in the control of the worker. The worker has more discretionary control of their effort now than ever before, because it's they know how much is done, they're more professional, there's fewer blue-collar work, people are better educated. So we have this tremendous shift from no control over our effort to now a great deal of control over our effort. And it changes with everybody. Like take a college professor. They have practically no supervision. They control their effort and time completely. Take a fast food worker. Their work and effort is controlled step by step every minute of the day. But in general, more people have control of their efforts and control of their time.
Now, the writer of Future Shock has said that we're in the age of communication now. Is communication a very vital part of this?
Well, it's communication is used to cover a lot of things, and I think that what we call communication is really hard to define. But people want to be involved. Definitely want to be involved. They want to be involved in setting up the work environment. They want to be involved in setting up the job requirements. They want to be involved in actually how the job is going to be done. It's not like the autocratic dictatorship that we used to have in organizations. People need this, and that's that new workforce especially. See, what happened to us in those of us my age, see, when we were growing up in a depression. And the one thing that kept us safe from the worst thing that can happen to us was a job. So we become company people. But then, of course, after World War II, we had the 50s, the most affluent time in the history of the United States. There were more jobs than people in the 50s, and yet people were better educated. And so now that's not an issue. People say, hey, I've got some needs, I want to meet them, and if the job doesn't meet them, I'll go somewhere else. So the job itself wasn't so important. Now in the 80s, we're seeing that switch again, that the job is becoming more important due to economic stress. So we're seeing that changing all the time, and we're seeing the effects on workers.
Now, what about the autonomy of the worker in changing jobs and in saying, well, this is the way my job will be and so forth? Do you see that changing some again now then, too?
Well, we're finding the new workforce. Remember in the 60s and 70s, the young people were really stressing, well, they were the best educated group we ever had. We educated the young people best in the 50s and 60s than we ever done before. And as you know, Arthur, one of the marks of an educated person is to question authority. And so we had the dynamics of the 60s and 70s of people questioning authority all the way to the national leadership, but also in organizations. They started to question authority. And so nowadays, but they wanted to have self-expression. They wanted to have personal growth. They wanted to have some kind of connectedness with the environment. And so they sought those things in leisure time rather than work. Now that was in the 60s and 70s. But now in the 80s, we see people with the same values saying, hey, we can meet those values at work. We can have self-expression. We can have personal growth. We can interact with our environment more appropriately, but still do it at work. And so that's what we're seeing what's happening now. And I think that's very exciting that we can do that. Because we found out that people that can express themselves, like you mentioned communications, do a better job. And people have personal growth, do a better job. People that can control their environment, do a better job. And so that's what we see happening, and it's very exciting.
What about selling your soul to the company store?
Oh, yeah.
16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Is there still a demand, or are workers able to say to companies, hey, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket, I'm not going to give you my whole life, or what's happening on that scene?
Well, of course, it varies with individuals. Some people like to marry a company and stay with them. Other people like the flexibility. And I see that probably the loyalty people have is to their discipline, to their profession, more than to companies. And, but also their needs are very important. But if economic forces are in play, if there's fewer jobs, like we're having more cutbacks, most organizations now are downsizing, Arthur. They're getting tighter and actually smaller. And so jobs aren't as plentiful. So a lot of people aren't as anxious to move around. But the entrepreneurs of the world that are starting these new businesses are offering a lot of new jobs. So it depends on the circumstance of the individuals. But we don't see that dynamic as much anymore.
Now, if a company is going to downsize and they're going to level off, where do they start? Do they start at the bottom with the workers? Do they start at the top with management? Or is it all the way through?
Well, probably all the way through, but I've seen, let's take a case right here in the Northwest. Weyerhaeuser did some tremendously reorganizations, and they had to. They were actually losing money. They were actually almost in competition with themselves. And they did a variety of things, from closing plants to modernizing plants to using new technology and so forth. That eliminated a lot of jobs, but they tried to take care of their people. But one of the biggest impacts that I observed was what they did at middle management. They eliminated almost a third of middle management's positions without losing an ounce of productivity. Because in a time of growth, which occurred in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, middle management tends to get fat. And so when we have to start cutting back, it's usually middle management cuts back, plus any other marginal workers that they have throughout.
I've observed, for instance, in school districts, when a school district settles where there's not a great deal of growth and teachers stay, they tend to go to the top of the scale, and the first thing you know, like we have in East County, a number of the schools where we have a large proportion of their teachers with high salaries at the top of the scale, or they've moved up. And so does this happen in business too, where sometimes companies have people always, of course, they're looking for raises, looking for promotions, that they tend to get too many at the top and too few at the entry level, or does that happen?
Well, that's happening now with middle management, I think. See, middle managers are usually the people that are very aggressive, they want to work very hard, and they finally reach middle management level, and they're seeking to go on up. But they look up, and that pyramid's pretty narrow up there. And they know that very few are going to go past middle management. There just aren't that many opportunities. So what do? They say, well, I'm not going to go up, but I'm going to make sure I don't go down. And so they kind of settle in, and they may not be the most productive workers, and they make sure. That's what's happening, I think, to women and minorities moving up in management. Very often, the very bright woman or a very bright minority that comes along and gets up, and they really get blocked in that middle management jungle. Top management love to have more women and minorities in management. But you take a typical middle-class male sees they're not going to go any further up, they're not going to be too cooperative to somebody else coming along that's going to go right on by him. So I think that is a dynamic that can occur.
Do women have a different style of management than men?
That's a very interesting question. I wish there was a woman manager here to answer this, but from my observations, most of them don't. I think most women get to where they are because they're just plain competent and willing to work harder than the average man. And so I see if there is a difference, it is a little bit more effort. They do their homework, and they're willing to really put in a lot of time in preparing for it. Now, some women, I think in the 70s, when women were learning how to live in organizations, we had the super aggressive women, and or we had the very sweet, seductive women going up, but they didn't last long. I think the women that we find in management today are highly competent, that are willing to do a little bit of extra effort, and that's unfortunate why they can't be paid, why they can't do the same as anyone else. But they are good, and we need them, and we're seeing the effects of them, because what they bring is important.
Okay, now I'm a manager of a company, and when am I going to need you, and when should I call you in, and for what reasons and what purposes, and what do you actually do when you come in?
Well, it's a variety of things, Arthur. I think that I'm an alter ego to management teams. When a team is going to have a major change that's going to affect the individuals, I work with the manager themselves to adjust to the change, planning the change, adjust the change. If there's a conflict between departments like engineering and sales, that's a classic problem. You know, salespeople are out there selling everything they can, making promises to customers, and the engineers haven't even invented the process yet. Or manufacturing and engineering, where the interdependency is an issue. So I work with units, I work with work teams, mainly help them be more effective in their processes, their decision making, the way they share information, the way they plan, these sort of things. And it's a very interesting job, and you never know from one day to the next what's going to happen.
Do you have to handle interpersonal conflicts in this?
Yes, quite a bit of. See, most conflict is either handled by a fight or withdrawal. And of course, those aren't the only alternatives. I think if we can find other ways of approaching conflict, we could be more productive. Because conflict isn't necessarily bad. It's neutral. It's what we do in conflict that makes it productive or unproductive.
Then what I hear you saying is, if I were going to make some radical changes where people are going to be assigned new duties and new relationships, maybe some new types of organizational plans are coming in, this would be one area where you would probably come in to smooth the crossover from one to another.
Well, hopefully I was in at the planning of it, because I think we could solve a lot of problems by the planning of the process and involving the people that are going to be involved. in the change.
So it isn't always a one-shot deal. You come in for 2 or
Oh,
3
no,
no.
I've been in one company 12 years.
Oh, I see.
Off and on. I come in and out for the last 12 years. I've had a couple medical centers now, and I've had one for 5 years. And so it changes quite a bit.
Well, you handle conflict management some where there's actually some conflict already, and you're called in to say, hey, what can we do about it?
Yeah, a lot of times they say it's a personality clash between two key managers of two interdependent departments. And I find very few conflicts, personality clashes. In fact, I don't know what a personality clash is. It's situational. Something's happened in their history of their relationship where one's been upset or offended or hurt, and they've carried on and never dealt with it, and so it builds up till finally they just don't agree. And so if we can get back to the situational part of it, we usually can resolve it. So I do a lot of third-party work.
Now, how many people are normally involved? Do you work with maybe 2 or 3, or do you have sometimes 10 or 12? Or?
All the way from 1 to 80.
1 to 80. Yeah.
But depending on what the situation is. But normally with teams of 7 and 8, the top team of a company, the president and the vice presidents, I spend a lot of time there, and hopefully then working with the subunits as we work through the organization.
Well, now there's been some changes, I know, in a number of relationships, and one that comes up is the labor management relationship. And it seems to me in some ways maybe labor unions have a far different role today than they once had. In some ways their power is fading, and they are maybe in a different way. What's your observation?
Well, the reason we needed labor unions was due to the behavior of management. See, management was unaware of the needs of people, and so in order to, it was kind of the whippee, and the whippees got tired of being whipped. And so unions developed through, you know, the last 80, 90 years because management was acting inappropriately. But now I think, well, most workers are not unionized in most organizations now. Unions have lost a lot of membership. But what I see happening as very exciting is a more collaborative relationship between labor and management. Ford Motor Car Company is one of the best examples. Their employee involvement program, that 80% of their interaction with a labor union is collaboration. They keep the collective bargaining clean. That's adversary. It should be, you know, the collective bargaining. But that's 20% of the issues should be dealt with that way. 80% of the issues in an organization ought to be collaboration. And some unions haven't discovered that yet. And some management hasn't discovered it yet. And so that's one of the big problems.
Now, some of the large companies are functioning without any unions at all.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them.
And how does labor then handle this when they're not unionized? How do they handle their relationships with management?
I think it's if they don't have a union there, the management is doing a better job of dealing with the needs of people. And so if they can, but most organizations don't have unions, have techniques and processes where they have chances where people can voice their concerns. They have employee relations people that help out and so forth. It's usually done by better management.
One of the places, of course, where we see unions perhaps more in public view is in education. And this has been a fascinating thing. Here was a professional organization that kind of grew up and gradually became a union. And for a long time, teachers wouldn't admit they had a union, but I think they admit it now.
Oh, yeah.
Have you any observation on the scene as to, in education, what's happening?
Well, I think the same thing is true in education. I think teachers were neglected tremendously by administration. See, school administrators are very seldom trained to be managers. They're educators. And somehow teachers and the teachers' salaries and working conditions were really rather poor. Look at the difference. A union custodian working for the Port of Portland makes more money than a starting teacher. And, you know, there's something wrong with that kind of a dynamic. Not that the custodian shouldn't get a living wage, but so should the teacher. And so the teachers' union had to develop to speak for the teachers. And they've done a good job, but we still haven't done much with the teachers' salaries. They're still tremendously low. So they're going to stay militant. But I'm seeing more of this same dynamic happening where the union, the association, is starting to be more open for collaboration with administration. But we have to learn how to do that more effectively. But I think teachers still need a strong voice. They need a strong voice to help them in what they're trying to achieve.
You feel that probably their militancy at the present time is still appropriate and
yes,
maybe will function for some time.
Until the salaries and working conditions are appropriate to their role in the community. Another public union, I think, is very interesting to watch, and I only have observations. I don't have any I haven't been involved at all is what's happening in the Portland Police Department with their union and the administration of the police department. They're totally adversary. And until we get a collaborative relationship to some degree, I think we're going to see a stalemate and actually a lack of effectiveness of both the administration and the police union.
Mm-hmm. Are you ever involved where strikes are involved?
No, that is not where I think I can offer a lot. I try to work before and after.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you see, say, a union and management moving into a new relationship, is it normally because the labor union has functioned well and got salaries to the point where they're pretty much where they should be, and so now this isn't the primary issue anymore and the primary anxiety, and we can talk about working conditions and productivity and other. Is that when the crossover takes place, or is it?
No, I think it's more when the interdependency of the survival of the organization becomes understood by both parties. So that the people, that the union can see that their jobs are at stake if they don't help that organization survive, and the organization feeling, hey, we can't survive without us paying attention to the needs of our people through the union. Mm-hmm. So I think that point is probably more important than the others. But also there's always a history. At aluminum plant in this area had a tremendous survival problem, and they wanted to have collaboration with the union. The union wouldn't collaborate with the old managers who've been there for 20 years they've had problems with. But so the national company sent a new person out, and the unions trusted that person, and they started to go into collaborative mode. So history, relationships, has a lot to do. It's a very complex problem.
Airlines seem to have a militant relationship still, do they not? There's a lot of strikes and a lot of, and I don't know, and they seem to have fairly high salaries too. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Well, deregulation, caused a lot of the dynamics that are occurring now. See, always before, I felt that the airline industry, since it was regulated, was pretty much responsive to the union demands, and salaries went quite high. But now that deregulation came into effect and competition became more of an impact, they have to find ways to cut back. And so I think that's where we're seeing a lot of problems there, and unions are having a difficult time with that, which I can be well aware of.
Mm-hmm. Is there any place where companies seem to get a loading where they get too many? Is it in middle management or promoted up there? Or have you any observation on that?
About people you're talking about?
Yeah, people, yeah.
Yeah, I think it occurs at all levels. But especially when you're in a growth pattern, you're always adding people. We need more people. We need more people. That's a famous cry of all managers. We need more staff. Mm-hmm. And actually what we're finding out now is we probably don't need more staff. We just need to do things better and learn how to do things better. And I think that's what occurs. But it happens at all levels.
Yeah. Have you any observation at all on affirmative action and minorities coming into businesses now and moving up into management and some of these things? Do you see this changing things at all, or is it?
Well, when I talk to my friends, minority friends and colleagues, they're still very unhappy, although I see a great improvement. We're seeing more and more people having opportunities to prove their worth and to advance. But you talk to minorities and they say, hey, no, we haven't made near as much progress. And of course, the present administration with some of its policies is not exactly supportive of affirmative action as we knew it when it first came out. Well, maybe we need to change that a little bit, but I do hope we still keep those doors open because we need the talents of both women and minorities tremendously.
Have you seen more women move into management through more recent years?
Up to a degree. I used to work with management teams. There'd be no women out of 7 or 8 people. Now I'll find 1 or 2. But I don't find most management teams equally, men and women. Although women now, there's many women in the workforce today as there are men. But we don't see them in management yet. We still got a long ways to go. But women have a tough job. They've got to decide about their career and their other choices of raising a family and so forth. Now, they can be done, but it's difficult. I have several women colleagues that both have a family, raising a family, and a career, and they combine the two very successfully. But it's difficult. Women have to be willing to make that choice. And they have to have husbands, if they are married, to support them in that choice.
What is your observation in terms of job changes and career changes? I'm thinking of my son, who is 36 years of age, and is in one of the electronic firms, and he's one of the older people. And he's just starting out. He's just rechanged his job, but most of his managers are younger than he is. What happens to some of the older people who haven't kept step, say, within the electronic field, and maybe they're sort of like some of the machinery become obsolete? Does that happen? Or?
Oh, I'm sure it does, Arthur. I'm sure a lot of people feel obsolete, and they finally get some non-jobs that company kind of reward them with. But I think we're going to have to start looking for people, again, having new opportunities to learn new careers. I think there's new ways of doing things, and I think a lot of jobs that are going to be available in 10 years from now, we don't know right today. And we've got to have some kind of mechanism to allow people to change and to learn new skills, learn new ways of doing things. I think he should find, if he's happy, fine, but if he wants to find somewhere else to go, a new niche, find a gap and fill it. That's kind of the entrepreneur's slogan.
Tell me about your own job and your own work. Have you found through the years that you've been in this consulting that you've had to change your technique some, and there's new things coming on the scene there too? Or how does this?
Well, yeah, when I first started, I just had what we call process skills. I help people make decisions, communication, all that. I didn't have some of the standard technologies of business, the economic side of business. Today, I've got to understand finance, I've got to understand economics, I've got to understand marketing, I've got to understand these things in order to do what else I'm doing. So if I was just starting out today, I probably couldn't make it for the skills I had when I started out. It's more complex. And I recommend to anybody that to have a variety of skills, whatever you take in school. You major in one thing, but have the other. If you major in electrical engineering, learn economics, finance, marketing. That's going to be important. Because I think now, if we remember now, the organizations in the 60s were run by engineers, if you remember. That was after Sputnik, and we think technology. 70s, it was all law. 80s, it's finance. You have to be real good in finance to survive today. Okay, but in the 90s, who's going to run organizations? I think it's going to be liberal arts people with an economics background, because things are going to be so complex that they got to be a wider focus than somebody in a technical skill.
I've heard Bob Pamplin, who was one of the founders of Georgia Pacific, on the board, Lewis and Clark, voicing very strongly the need for liberal education. And he said if he had to choose for management between one with a liberal education, one with a very narrow engineering type or very narrowly, he would choose liberal education every time because the scope and the perspective of that person is so broader. Is that what you observe?
Yeah, people are demanding more, and it's the economics are changing. You need a liberal approach rather than a financial law or technical approach.
As you think of your field, is there education or majors in this type of thing, or is it something, it's relatively new, isn't it?
Well, it's about 20 years old. It's called organizational development, OD, and so there is a field, there is a profession, there is a discipline, and many graduate schools of businesses now have programs in it. It's called organizational behavior, which is different than industrial engineering or something like that in an organization. But it's in the behavioral sciences. But there are many more programs starting out. Undergraduate courses aren't quite as common, but graduate schools are doing it. So it is a new field, and yes, I have to fall into it, and it's been exciting.
In 20 seconds, can you tell me what's been the most exciting thing about your new career?
Well, the freedom I have, I think, is I have a high value for freedom, and that's been one of my great rewards. But also working and seeing a difference being made. We can change things. We can change organizations. People can change. People always ask me, can people change? You bet. And I think that's what's exciting.
Well, having known you, of course, I know you have a real ability to change too, and I suppose that's one of the reasons you're in the job that you're in, where you're able to move with the scene and able to look at new models and new ways of doing things. I'm sure this is probably part of it too. And I guess that's what's needed in management, isn't it? The ability to shift gear and to do the types of things that are needed to meet the changing times and changing techniques and all of this. And of course there's been an emergence of a lot of things to make this possible.